Can we do better? We're going to talk about how you can invest in the right DevOps practices and get better. The reason we're talking about this today is because I realize that you probably aren't doing it right, and that's just fine. What we need to realize whenever we're going through a DevOps implementation is that the most important thing isn't doing what the experts are saying is the correct thing to do. What the real thing that we need to focus on is looking at what we're doing and saying, this sucks, we can do it better. When we're talking about this, what we're getting into is something called continuous improvement. We can apply this to all manner of things. And the thing we need to adopt when we're talking about continuous improvement and DevOps is the concept of continuous everything. And this is why the word continuous is used in so many different terms like continuous integration and deployments and delivery. We use this because what we need is repetition. We need to have an art of repetition which delivers repeatable processes and predictable delivery. If we can achieve a predictable delivery pattern, this is money in the bank for us. What we're trying to do here is achieve the ability to know that we aren't just guessing. We know what we're doing. We know how to do this again and again and again. We need to be deliberate, not only about how we improve, but also how we do our delivery. And we achieve this by starting small and then getting a little bit better and then doing that again and again. Repeat always. A few years ago, I started talking about the DevOps maturity model. And there's a lot of maturity models that are out there, but this is one that I wanted to put together to highlight continuous improvement. As time goes along, new technologies arrive, new ways of doing things, new philosophies, those all change. Whatever it is that you're trying to target to do, some things do stay the same. We have this concept of things that are involved in our building of software. We have the stuff that we do to test our software, and we have things to operate our software. And we need to continuously improve throughout all of these areas. A couple years ago, when I first presented this maturity model, one of the things that I was really talking about at that time was getting teams up on continuous integration. And this meant figuring out your source control and how you would get things from your dev machine through the other team members onto a server. Then we started talking a little bit more about automating your testing. Or how we now really the focus is how do we deploy to production. All of these pieces are showing that the entire industry is coming up. Everybody's going together, and we're ramping up where you need to be, and we're all continuously improving what we're focusing on as being the next important thing. So how do we do this? We need to be better than we were yesterday. So that means we have to look at whatever we're doing. We have to question it. We have to look for a way to optimize what we're doing and then improve not just our tools, but our processes as well. Always looking to minimize waste. How do we get a little bit better, a little bit better? How do we squeeze just a little bit more efficiency out of what we're doing? How do we make our lives easier? Making something take a little bit less time is maybe not as important as being able to have time to go grab a beer with your friends that night. This is all where we're trying to improve everything as part of the process. So when we start talking about this, I mentioned that the first elements that we wanted to talk to was about continuous integration. And this is really where I think we have the most valuable investments that we get in our dev teams, especially in a Sitecore context. This isn't just about compiling a little bit of code and putting it out there. This is very much about how do we take the database and our code, compile it together, and put a solution in another place that proves that we are in a deployable state. The works on my machine is just not good enough. We need to be able to go one step beyond that. And as I mentioned, it's more than just code. In Sitecore, we deal with uh, items all over the place, whether they be rendering definitions or template definitions, which have our fields, or security settings, or maybe we have workflow definitions. There's a lot of places that are part of the solution architecture. We have code that is directly tied to these things. And pushing things out is we need to make sure that we're doing both the source code and the database at the same time. People who are just getting into this concept with Sitecore sometimes uh, don't get it. So I try to explain it a different way, is saying if you had two classes in your C# project and one referenced the other, and you changed one of them, and then you changed the other, you would always put those two together and put them out at the same time. You would make sure that those worked as DLLs and they had references to each other, and you wanted to make sure that they were in the same service at the same time. And we have to do the same thing with our solution items. So for example, let's take a look at an item that has a template. The template has specific fields on it. If you add a new field and you want that displayed, you have an associated HTML Razor rendering. You probably have some kind of object model that you're binding to. And all of these need to go together at the same time. So you've got compiled code, you've got static CSHTML, and you've got an item in the database, all going out. You probably have a rendering definition for that Razor view as well. So now you've got these different pieces that all need to be pulled together. And so we need to make sure as teams that we have the tools and the processes to be able to work together, track what these changes are in source control, and be able to deploy them all at the same time. Another thing that comes along with continuous integration is a culture change. It's not just about deploying, it's also about ownership, being able to identify when something's wrong, and particularly who broke it. We need to adopt a culture of you broke it, you fix it. What happens then is somebody checks in their code on Friday and suddenly goes red on the dashboard. It's that person's responsibility to make sure it goes back to green. And this is part of owning the responsibility of the quality of the build. And by the way, on Friday afternoon, don't check in your code and walk out the door. Just please, give yourself a little bit of time to figure out, yes, it actually did go okay, and I don't have to stay the next 3 hours and figure out what I broke. Now, beyond continuous integration, I started talking about improving the quality. So what are the other things which I'm very interested in us investing more in, especially in the Sitecore world, is the concept of continuous testing. The most obvious and familiar version of this would be unit testing. You make a change, you compile, it runs tests, you immediately have feedback. And it's all about that quick feedback. In a traditional large organization, and I've seen this in a lot of enterprises, there's kind of this philosophy of there's the dev engineer team, and then there's the QA testing team. And there's a whole bunch of work that happens over here, and then something happens, and throw it over the wall, and then testing happens. This is a philosophy that is changing over time, and more organizations are understanding that this just doesn't work. We need to have earlier feedback in the process. We can't wait until we've done 3 months of work to find out the first feedback from the testing. Now, there's multiple ways we can go about this. I already mentioned unit tests, and we'll get to that. But my favorite one is embedding testers in the team. I think that even if they have to sit in another building, in another organization, they need to be part of your team. You need to treat them as an equal member. That means inviting them to your scrums or your meetings, making sure they're part of the requirements clarifications, making sure that they get every time you're doing an iteration of a build that they have access to where that code's going, making sure that they have the ability to update as they go the tasks and figure out when something's been worked on so they can immediately start giving feedback on pieces. The reason this is key is that it is the shortest feedback loop. And just like we like having devs co-located, and then if not co-located, you want to have them talking every day, we get the testers in automatically. They're up to date on what's happening. If a business requirement changes, they know about it. and we get this optimum ability for the team to just work together. So for those of you who are thinking of DevOps as tools, you might be thinking, well, how is this a tool? This is a process change. This is a culture. DevOps also embodies us bringing together our teams and breaking down the walls. Now on the tooling side, I mentioned unit tests. So the handy thing about unit tests is that developers can write it. It can easily work against what you have in your code base. Very simple to run as part of a continuous integration tool. And those are the developers who are doing test-driven design and are really good at it. You can see incredible results from this approach. The problem is you have to be really good at it. Not everybody is a great developer. Not everybody is a great tester. Not everybody who is a great developer can also be a great tester. In fact, I would argue that they are very different philosophies of thinking. That what you have to think about in terms of determining edge cases, being able to say that yes, on this form field, I want to test the number with a word. I want to use negative numbers. I want to be able to determine whether or not I can overflow the memory by putting in too large a number. These types of thought processes are just part of those who are great QA professionals. And someone who's on the dev side may or may not be thinking about all these boundary conditions. So unit tests have an advantage of being very quick. They're being done by the person who's going to be doing the code, so it automatically forces them to think about the quality as they're building. But you often have a mismatch of skill sets. And this, if you have testers embedded in your team, maybe there's a way for your test team to be able to working with your developers so they can bring that particular expertise in with your devs and then take advantage of the tools. A third option, which I've found works really well in a Sitecore context, is the concept of automated regression testing. So automated regression testing is less about the functional level, does this method work, and more about looking at the end product and running through scenarios and then comparing them against a previous stage. I find that this has a lot of value in it in a Sitecore context, especially when you're looking at upgrades. So if you have to do an upgrade, you have an existing site, you know how it's supposed to work, you can record everything and how it's supposed to do, and then you can do your upgrade and then run again, and you can validate whether or not it works. The disadvantage here is that Sitecore itself, the UIs and the experience editor and all that, it's a little harder for you to go through. It takes more investment for you to automate those particular regression tests through the UI. The advantage is Sitecore itself, not very testable. There's a lot of static classes, a lot of older areas, legacy areas that you can't really run unit tests against. Automated regression testing, by using tools like Selenium, you can go in and test from the front end where the users are seeing things where you know you can actually run tests. I found that in terms of return on investment, there's it doesn't take a lot to get these regression tests running. However, you get a lot of value back from it. So depending on the scenario that you're looking at, you might be looking at a balance of regression testing and unit tests for different parts of what you want to check. Now, a final way for you to do some continuous testing is to include the business doing UAT throughout the delivery process. This is not easy to do. How many people would say that it has been their experience that someone who is a business owner of the project is available every 2 weeks to do a thorough UAT to make sure that the team is on track? It just isn't something that happens regularly. It's very hard. These people are high in demand, especially the senior stakeholders. They're very interested in the outcome product, but they do not want to be involved all the time. However, if you can get them involved, there's a high degree of value in it. What you get back is an immediate feedback. Again, we're getting back to short feedback loops. The business telling you what they want and being able to validate that what you're doing meets with what they want. Let's take a look at something like building a site with particular branding. The brand marketing team probably very, very interested in the color palette. As soon as you've got a color palette, if you're able to get the feedback on them, we love doing that during the creative piece. But then we start building it into the front end CSS, and we're often not engaging that brand marketing team again. They need to be brought in once they see how the colors start being used in an interactive interface. For example, in the experience editing, or perhaps you're doing rollover effects or mouse overs or something like that. In that scenario, they might see it in action and go, this doesn't look right. Or they might see it on different monitors or on a device, and maybe the brand is just not feeling the way that they were expecting. Getting this type of feedback early on is critical. We need to be able to involve them as early as possible. Now, so if I was going to rate those options, I'd say your best bang is 1, get your testers embedded in your team. 2, I'd say automated regression testing probably has the highest ROI on it. 3, unit tests are the easiest to integrate into your processes and your tools, but sometimes has a lower ROI on it. And 4, getting the business UAT. High ROI, very difficult amount of work to get into. So going beyond testing, we talked about integration, going beyond testing, going towards deploying. This is where we want to talk about continuous delivery. So continuous delivery is about having a regular cycle that lets you get your software out into the world and being used. It's about return on investment. We need to get our money's worth. We need to have the shortest cycle between needing and having. Getting the investment into production means someone is using it so that we get to know whether or not it's working and we can iterate on it. So if it doesn't work exactly right, at least it was better than we were before. It comes back to our continuous improvement, right? Small steps, small packages, better today than we were yesterday, better tomorrow. To do that, we have to accept a smaller package. This may mean not taking in a 2-year, 3-year plan and breaking that down into smaller chunks. Those smaller chunks have to be sustainable. So don't do like check off here and be picking up on something that you just cannot keep up indefinitely. You might be able to do a release every week for a couple of weeks, but your team is going to just totally burn out, and you need to be able to have a way to keep it going. Maybe every quarter is how it works. Maybe 2 weeks is how it works. Maybe it's every month. Finding the cycle that your team can keep up with and putting your processes and tools in place to support it. That's how we achieve continuous delivery. And we need to make sure everybody's involved here. So it may not be good enough that the ops team and the dev team are involved. What if the QA team doesn't have the bandwidth? You need to be able to build, test, deploy, maintain, and then define the new changes afterwards. So your business, your test, your dev, your ops, at the very least, you need to get all those involved. Once we have the ability to continuously deliver, then we can start looking at shortening that distance between needing and having. And this is where we get into something like continuous deployment, where you have almost real time. Finally, what's DevOps without operations? So one of our goals, as I mentioned, with DevOps is to break down the barriers between all of our teams. And we want to break down particularly between development and operations. Fact is, we have different goals. We want to have really highly functional code, but we also want to have stable environments that are operating well. When we talked about continuous delivery, we are going to work with our ops team on how is the best way to maintain code, build code, and then deploy to production. But that's just one aspect of it. Operations is about more than pushing code to prod. For example, do you know right now if your site is down? Are you able to monitor if your visitors have stopped being able to purchase products in your checkout process? So your site might be up, but people can't find it. Are you able to provide a continuous uptime even during deployments? These are the types of questions that an operations team needs to worry about. These are the ones that often get missed by developers because it's past building the next function. This is about how do we report? How do we monitor? How do we deploy and maintain uptime? How do we do disaster recovery? These are key pieces that need to also be continuous. It can't be just somebody's going in every now and then and looking at the site. Oh, is it up right now? No, we need to put in tools and processes that allow us to monitor, report, and react if possible. So if we bring ourselves back to the maturity model, we got a lot of stuff available to us across the entire gamut of investments. We need to find where we can invest the best. There's a lot of stuff available in the operation, a lot of places to invest there. So don't just do build stuff. Don't just do test stuff. Don't just do operation stuff. We need to pick the elements from each area where we're going to get the most value. This is about finding the key for your organization that's going to work to get your Sitecore deployments out the door the fastest possible, but also getting the best return on investment. Now, I just want to mention, if anybody happens to be coming to Symposium, on Wednesday, October 18th at 11:15 a.m., the Effective DevOps for Sitecore panel is going to be running. I'll be moderating, and I'll be inviting my guests, Derek, Cam, and Joe, who are some excellent DevOps experts within the Sitecore world. And we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different topics. So love for you to come on and say hello. Now, if anybody has some questions, please feel free to send them to me. But I want to leave you with one thing to remember. Every day when you go in, make sure you're looking at what you're doing and saying, man, this sucks. We can do better. Thank you.